What this former military officer couldn't possibly know was that his biggest mistake wasn't questioning his own renovation skills. It would be underestimating what he was about to discover hidden beneath the flooded basement that would change his life and rewrite a forgotten chapter of American history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weathered brick facade of Station 42 stood as a forgotten landmark in the Harborview district of Millfield. Its faded red doors and tarnished brass fixtures told stories of decades when this coastal New England community thrived as a shipbuilding and naval support hub. Those prosperous times had vanished nearly 30 years ago, when the regional defense industry contracted following the end of the Cold War, leaving behind a struggling town of skilled workers, searching for a new purpose in an economy that no longer valued their traditional expertise. Among the municipal buildings abandoned during budget cuts was the historic Millfield Fire Station 42. Its equipment bay silent after housing generations of firefighters and emergency vehicles. The once proud station had served the community since 1943, but economic realities and district consolidation had rendered it obsolete, at least in the eyes of city planners, focused on spreadsheets rather than community heritage. The monthly meeting of the Millfield Community Revitalization Board was in full swing at Callahan's Diner, a local institution where handshake agreements still carried more weight than legal contracts, and community concerns were debated over plates of New England clam chowder. Coffee mugs clinked against worn Formica tables, while the aroma of fresh-baked cornbread mingled with conversations about how to revitalize their struggling downtown district. Walter Grayson, whose family had operated Grayson's Marine Supply for 3 generations, commanded attention from his usual corner booth. At 62, his weathered face and practical demeanor testified to decades spent providing equipment and advice to fishermen throughout the harbor. The Grayson name was synonymous with reliability in Millfield, their blue and white sign a landmark on Harbor Street since 1958. The city finally put Station 42 up for auction after sitting vacant for 8 years now, Walter announced to the gathered community leaders, gesturing toward the window that faced the old fire station across the town square. Starting bid was $5,000, but they couldn't get a single serious offer. Not surprising. Not in this market, agreed Catherine Donovan, who ran Donovan Real Estate from the colonial office her grandfather had established after returning from the Korean War. Her family had been the go-to resource for property transactions in Millfield for 65 years, building relationships throughout the region. That building's been deteriorating since the hurricane damage in 2018. The repair estimates alone scared off most potential investors. The building in question, formerly Millfield Fire Station 42, occupied a prominent corner location with excellent visibility from the town square. The property had been struggling with mounting maintenance issues, outdated infrastructure, and accumulated neglect that had overwhelmed the municipal budget. Local contractors estimated it would require substantial investment just to bring the historic structure up to current safety codes. Who's going to want that headache? Asked Michael Fleming, whose family construction business had been building homes in the harbor since the 1960s. Place needs new electrical, updated plumbing, and definitely asbestos remediation. You're looking at 6 figures minimum before you could even think about occupying the space legally. Before Walter could respond, Catherine's assistant Sarah, who managed the digital presence for several local businesses, joined the conversation with news that caught everyone's attention. "Someone already bought it," she said, lowering her voice despite the diner's bustling atmosphere. "Came into our office yesterday asking about commercial zoning regulations and adaptive reuse permits. Some guy who's never owned property in Millfield before." A murmur of surprise rippled through the group. Station 42 had been a discussion topic for years, with its asking price steadily dropping as potential buyers were scared off by the extensive renovation requirements and questionable return on investment. The building inspector had flagged numerous violations, and rumors about structural issues had further complicated any potential sale. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A man? Walter's wife Margaret raised an eyebrow as she slid into the booth beside her husband. Margaret managed the financial side of Grayson's Marine Supply and understood better than most how challenging property renovation had become, with rising material costs and labor shortages affecting the entire construction industry. "What's his background?" asked Catherine, genuine curiosity mixing with professional skepticism. Real estate development in Millfield was built on local knowledge and proven resources. Newcomers faced an uphill battle earning trust from both contractors and community members. "Some kind of retired military officer, apparently," Sarah replied, checking her notes thoughtfully. "Said something about historic preservation and community-centered restoration. Had credentials from the Naval Civil Engineer Corps. Kept talking about honoring the building's legacy while creating functional community space." Michael Fleming gave a dismissive snort. "Honoring legacy? You mean underestimating costs and abandoning the project halfway through when reality hits? That's how these idealistic types operate. They have grand visions without practical understanding." "If he can even secure the permits," Catherine added. "That building's mechanical systems were outdated when landlines were still current. The electrical panel alone is a complete replacement job." "Did anyone ask what he paid for it?" Margaret inquired, her accountant's instincts focusing on the financial aspects. "The city was asking $60,000 last I heard, which was already a massive reduction considering the land value alone," Catherine noted. Sarah's expression conveyed her disbelief before she spoke. $2,500. $2,500? Walter repeated, nearly choking on his coffee. "The brass fixtures alone are worth more than that, even as scrap metal." The group exchanged glances of amazement and suspicion. Such an absurdly low price suggested either desperate circumstances on the seller's side or hidden problems that made the property essentially worthless. Municipal buildings in Millfield, even in declining condition, typically commanded prices reflecting their historic value and central locations. "He's got a teenage son too," Sarah continued. Boy seemed interested in the building's history, asking about the station's role during the hurricane of '62 and whether the community archives had photos of the original crew. "No wife?" Catherine asked, though her tone suggested professional curiosity rather than gossip. "Didn't mention one. Just the two of them, looking like they're starting completely over." Said something about leaving Virginia after his military retirement made him reevaluate his priorities. Walter shook his head with the certainty of someone who had witnessed many renovation projects fail over the years. "I give him 6 months. Tops. Remember that couple from Boston who tried to convert the old cannery into artist studios back in 2019? Ran out of money before they even finished demolition." The conversation might have continued along these predictable lines, but the diner's front door opened with its characteristic jingle, admitting a gust of salt-tinged harbor air and the last person any of them expected to see at a gathering of established Millfield business owners. Daniel Hayes stood in the doorway, scanning the room with perceptive blue eyes that missed nothing. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to assessing situations under pressure and developing practical strategies. His dark hair was cropped short in military fashion, and while his clothes were clearly new work boots, durable jeans, and a thermal shirt that hadn't yet acquired the characteristic wear of daily labor, there was nothing pretentious about his appearance. Beside him stood a teenager with his father's analytical expression, but sporting headphones around his neck and a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. his expression oscillating between supportive enthusiasm and teenage embarrassment at being dragged to this gathering of adults he'd never met. The pair hesitated momentarily, taking in the room full of strangers who had suddenly fallen silent at their entrance. Daniel took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked directly toward the group of business owners who had just been discussing his inevitable failure. "Good afternoon," Daniel said as he approached, his voice carrying a trace of Virginia accent but projecting the confidence that came from 20 years of military leadership. "I'm Daniel Hayes, the new owner of Station 42. Yet something about his direct manner and evident preparation left them feeling slightly less certain of his failure than they had been before meeting him. He was clearly no dilettante playing at preservation. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. $50 says he's gone by Thanksgiving," Michael murmured to Sarah as they watched Daniel introduce himself to the town librarian. Sarah considered this, watching as Daniel listened intently to the older woman's stories about the station's role in community history. "I don't know," she said slowly. "There's something about him. I'm not saying he'll definitely make it, but I'm not betting against him either." Walter, overhearing them, said nothing, but he made a mental note to check his storage shed for period-appropriate hardware that might assist a restoration project operating on minimal capital, just in case. 2 weeks after the revitalization board meeting, Daniel stood in the cavernous equipment bay of Station 42, surveying the progress they'd made and the challenges that remained. The building around him showed signs of gradual transformation. Scaffolding supported workers replacing damaged ceiling panels. Freshly scrubbed brick walls revealed their original warm color, and thoroughly cleaned windows allowed natural light to flood the space for the first time in years. But significant problems persisted. The electrical system continued throwing breakers whenever they used multiple power tools. The ancient boiler made concerning noises when building pressure, and the basement had developed significant water infiltration during the previous night's heavy rainfall. Like everything else in the former fire station, each repair revealed 3 more issues hidden beneath. The engineering report that had arrived that morning confirmed his suspicions about the building's foundation. Before he could finish renovating the living quarters, the entire basement waterproofing system would need upgrading at a cost of nearly $22,000, money he simply didn't have in his carefully planned budget. He was studying the contractor's estimate when the familiar sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Catherine Donovan's SUV, bearing the distinctive Donovan Real Estate logo, pulled into the freshly cleared parking lot. "Morning, Daniel," Catherine called as she climbed out of the vehicle. Her tone had warmed considerably since their initial meeting, though it still carried the measured caution of someone waiting to see if first impressions would prove accurate. "Good morning, Catherine. I wasn't expecting visitors today." "Brought those station photographs we discussed," Catherine replied, retrieving a leather portfolio from her passenger seat. "Found them in our archive while researching another property. Thought they might help with your restoration details." "I appreciate you making the effort," Daniel said, watching Catherine navigate around stacks of reclaimed lumber. Historical accuracy matters, especially for a building that meant so much to the community. Catherine nodded approvingly. "Smart perspective, though you might find some locals don't care about preservation if it adds to project timeline or costs." "Maybe, but I suspect more people value their heritage than we realize. They just haven't been shown how it connects to their present." As they moved deeper into the station, Catherine surveyed the building improvements with a critical eye. "You've been busy. Got that main bay looking almost functional. Jason deserves most of the credit for the documentation and research. He has better instincts for connecting historical details than I do. Speaking of Jason, where is he today?" "Working with Rebecca Sanderson on our website. She's home from college for the summer and has been invaluable getting our digital presence established." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Rebecca Sanderson? Computer science major at State University? That's her." Jason found her through some online local heritage forum. She's building our virtual tour and crowdsourcing platform for community memories about the station. Rebecca's a good kid, Catherine acknowledged. Her grandparents were founding members of the Historical Society. If she's helping you, that says something positive about your project. The endorsement felt significant. Daniel was learning that in communities like Millfield, family connections and generational relationships carried weight that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. I heard you hired the Martinez boy for part-time work too. Catherine continued as they navigated toward the former chief's office. Diego has been fantastic. Handles visitor inquiries, manages our volunteer schedule, and has great instincts for community outreach. Plus, he actually wants to learn about structural engineering, which is rare. The Martinez family goes back 4 generations in this harbor, Catherine agreed. Been struggling since the shipyard downsized. Diego's college fund could probably use the help. Daniel was beginning to understand how Millfield operated. Every business decision had personal implications for families who had lived here for decades. Success or failure affected not just his own family, but a network of relationships built over generations. Catherine, can I ask you something? Sure. When I bought this place, the city council seemed almost desperate to sell quickly. They accepted my first offer without negotiation, which seemed unusual for a historic public building, even when needing renovation. Catherine's expression became guarded. The town went through some difficult times after the hurricane. Between deferred maintenance and declining tax revenue, they inherited more problems than solutions. Selling quickly was probably their only option to avoid further liability. The explanation made sense, but something in Catherine's tone suggested there might be more to the story. Before Daniel could pursue the question further, Jason appeared in the doorway connecting the chief's office to the dispatch area. Dad, the website is live and our virtual tour platform is working. Rebecca wants to show you the community memory portal. I'll be right there, son. Catherine watched the interaction with evident approval. That son of yours is going to be a real asset to this community. Not many teenagers show that level of commitment to preserving local history. He's been my partner through everything, Daniel said with obvious pride. I couldn't have done any of this without him. After his mom passed away 3 years ago, we've been a team. Well, you better get those digital systems figured out. Word is spreading about your approach to community involvement. Martha from the senior center mentioned you spent 2 hours discussing how they might use the space for their veteran support programs. The comment surprised Daniel. That's just good community engagement. People deserve to feel ownership of spaces with significant public history. Maybe where you come from, Catherine replied with a slight smile. Around here, developers have traditionally been more interested in quick profits than community benefits. As Catherine prepared to leave, she hesitated, as if debating whether to share something important. Daniel, there's something you should know. Harbor Point Investments has been making inquiries about properties in the downtown district. They've approached several business owners about selling, usually with offers significantly above market value. Harbor Point Investments? They're behind that luxury marina project on the East Shore. Word is they're interested in transforming this entire historic district into an upscale shopping and dining destination, the kind of development that would eliminate authentic local businesses like ours. A chill ran through Daniel that had nothing to do with the harbor breeze. He had invested everything he had financially and emotionally into building a life in this community. The thought of being forced out by development pressure was terrifying. Have they approached you? Not yet, but they've made offers to Walter and Michael. Neither was interested, but the company's representatives made it clear they expect the zoning to change eventually. They suggested that early cooperation would be more profitable than waiting for inevitability. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Daniel had encountered similar corporate tactics during his time in the military. Pressure disguised as opportunity. with implied consequences for resistance. What do you think their chances are of changing the zoning? Catherine shrugged, but her expression was troubled. Depends on how much political influence they can buy and whether the community stands together. Development money can be very persuasive to town councils facing budget shortfalls. After Catherine left, Daniel stood alone in the former chief's office, surrounded by the half-completed restoration that represented his family's future, and felt the weight of challenges he hadn't anticipated. Creating a community center was difficult enough without external pressure threatening the very foundation of his investment. But as he looked around at the improvements they'd made, the relationships they'd begun building, and the evidence of Jason's growing confidence and skills, he felt his determination strengthened rather than weakened. He had come too far to be intimidated by corporate pressure. Whatever Harbor Point Investments had planned, they would discover that Daniel Hayes was not someone who backed down from a fight, especially when his son's future was at stake. What he didn't yet know was that the greatest challenge to his community center wasn't corporate development pressure or community skepticism. It was hidden directly beneath the station's basement floor, and the approaching storm would soon uncover a secret that had remained hidden for nearly 8 decades, changing not just Daniel's life, but potentially the economic future of the entire community. The grand opening of Station 42 Community Center exceeded Daniel's most optimistic projections. The combination of free guided tours and Jason's targeted social media campaign had attracted a steady stream of curious locals, many openly skeptical, but unable to resist exploring the transformed space. The thoughtfully designed exhibits showcasing firefighter equipment through the decades generated enthusiastic conversations, while their specialized focus on World War II-era emergency preparedness drew interest from history buffs willing to drive significant distances. By closing time, they had booked 4 community events for the following month and received several partnership inquiries from local organizations. It wasn't financial security, but it represented genuine progress toward sustainability. Not bad for day one, Walter acknowledged when he stopped by late in the afternoon, though his tone carried the reservation of someone who had seen many promising starts fail to maintain momentum. The real test comes when the novelty wears off and winter slows tourism. I know, Daniel agreed, but at least people are willing to give us a chance. As encouraging as the public response had been, it was what happened that night that would change everything for Daniel and Jason Hayes. Powerful nor'easter had been battering the New England coast for hours, its driving rain and howling winds testing Station 42's newly repaired roof and windows. While the upper floors remained dry, the problematic basement was another story. Around midnight, Daniel awoke to Jason's urgent voice. "Dad, the basement's flooding fast." Daniel threw on clothes and grabbed flashlights, following his son down to the basement level where water was already ankle-deep and rising. The storm had overwhelmed the aging drainage system, sending water pouring through foundation cracks faster than the sump pump could remove it. "We need to move the stored equipment to higher ground," Daniel directed, wading toward the shelving units they'd installed for renovation supplies. For the next hour, father and son worked frantically to salvage what they could, moving tools and materials to the upper floors while trying to direct the flowing water away from electrical panels. As Daniel moved a heavy storage cabinet, the force of the water caused the floor beneath it to collapse partially, revealing what appeared to be a concealed concrete chamber. "Dad, look at this," Jason called, shining his flashlight into the opening. "There's some kind of room under the floor." Daniel knelt beside the hole, careful of the crumbling concrete edges. His beam illuminated what appeared to be a purposefully constructed vault or safe room extending beneath the basement. "That's definitely not in any of the building plans," Daniel muttered, studying the exposed section. "This was intentionally hidden. Can we get in there?" Jason asked, excitement momentarily overriding his concern about the flooding. "Not safely right now," Daniel replied, noting how the water was now pouring into the hidden chamber. "We need to focus on stopping this flood before we worry about hidden rooms." By dawn, they had managed to control the worst of the flooding with additional pumps borrowed from Walter's marine supply store. The basement remained partially underwater, but they'd prevented catastrophic damage to the building's electrical and heating systems. As the storm subsided and pale morning light filtered through the basement windows, Daniel returned to the mysterious opening in the floor. "Whatever this is, it was built to last," he observed, studying the reinforced concrete walls of the chamber, now visible beneath the damaged flooring. And it was definitely meant to be hidden. Jason knelt beside his father, his natural teenage curiosity fully engaged. Secret government facility? Hidden treasure? Prohibition-era speakeasy? Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion. Probably just additional storage that got sealed up during renovations decades ago. But we won't know until we can safely get down there. It took 3 days to fully pump out the basement and begin drying the space with industrial dehumidifiers. The damage would set back their renovation timeline by weeks and strain their already tight budget. But Daniel's military training had taught him to focus on immediate priorities rather than dwelling on setbacks. Right now, the priority was investigating the hidden chamber safely. With the basement finally dry enough to work in, Daniel and Jason carefully widened the opening in the floor, removing crumbling concrete to reveal a rusted metal hatch with what appeared to be an old combination lock mechanism. "This is definitely not standard construction," Daniel noted, examining the heavy-duty hardware. "This was built to secure something valuable. How do we get it open?" Jason asked, already documenting the discovery with his phone's camera. The combination lock presented an obvious obstacle. Daniel studied it carefully, noting the age and design. "This looks like 1940s military-grade equipment, similar to what I've seen in some naval installations. Can we break it open?" Daniel shook his head. "Not without potentially damaging whatever's inside. Let's see if there's any documentation about this in the city records." The building was constructed in 1943, right in the middle of World War II. This might have had some military purpose. A visit to the Millfield Historical Society yielded unexpected results. The archivist, thrilled with their discovery, located the original building plans for Station 42, which made no mention of any basement vault. However, she also found a sealed envelope containing the personal papers of Fire Chief William Donovan, who had overseen the station's construction in 1943. "Donovan?" Daniel asked. "Any relation to Catherine?" "His grandson was Catherine's father," the archivist confirmed. "The Donovans have been fixtures in Millfield for generations." Inside the envelope was a small water-stained journal containing Chief Donovan's handwritten notes about equipment maintenance and station protocols. On the final page, written in faded blue ink, was a series of numbers with no accompanying explanation. 2714368. "Worth trying," Daniel said when they returned to the station, turning the rusty dial carefully. To his amazement, the lock clicked open on the first attempt. "No way," Jason whispered. "That's either incredibly lucky or seriously suspicious." Daniel hesitated, suddenly aware they might be crossing a line into something they didn't understand. Maybe we should contact someone before going further. "Like the police? And tell them what?" Jason asked practically. "Hello, officer. We found a secret vault in our legally purchased building and thought you should know." "They'll think we're making it up." After another moment's deliberation, Daniel's curiosity prevailed. He pulled the metal hatch open, revealing a small chamber built into the foundation. His flashlight beam illuminated what appeared to be a dry, concrete-lined compartment, approximately 6 feet deep. "I'm going to check it out," he announced. "You stay here in case anything happens." "Absolutely not," Jason protested. "This is exactly like those treasure hunter movies. Either we both look or neither of us looks." Recognizing the stubborn determination in his son's expression, a trait Jason had inherited honestly, Daniel nodded. "Fine, but I go first. And if anything seems dangerous, we're out of there immediately." The vault proved surprisingly clean and dry, protected from the recent flooding by its watertight design. As Daniel's flashlight swept the space, both father and son gasped at what they discovered. It wasn't a simple storage safe or emergency shelter. The small room was lined with heavy metal shelving, and on those shelves sat dozens of wooden crates, each stenciled with official-looking markings. In the center stood a small desk bearing what appeared to be a vintage typewriter and logbook. "Dad," Jason whispered, his voice tight with uncertainty, "what is this place?" Daniel shook his head, equally baffled. "I have absolutely no idea." They moved cautiously through the small chamber, careful not to disturb anything while trying to understand what they'd discovered. The wooden crates were sealed but labeled with alphanumeric codes and official government markings from the War Department, the predecessor to today's Department of Defense. "These look like military storage crates from World War II," Daniel said slowly, the implication sending chills through him. "But why would they be hidden under a fire station in Millfield?" Jason had moved to the desk and was carefully examining the logbook. "Dad, look at this. It's a record of some kind, dated 1943 to 1945. Daniel joined his son, and together, they carefully turned the brittle pages of the logbook. What they found was astonishing, a detailed record of government bonds, specifically. But why hide them in a secret vault under a fire station? Daniel carefully turned more pages in the logbook, looking for answers. According to this, these aren't just ordinary bonds bought by citizens. These appear to be high-value bonds, purchased by corporations and wealthy individuals, designated for secure regional storage pending transfer to Treasury facilities. So this was like a temporary holding place? "It seems so," Daniel agreed, studying the entries more carefully. "But the last entry is from May 1945, right around when the war in Europe ended. It looks like these bonds were never transferred to their final destination." "They've just been sitting here for almost 80 years, Jason asked incredulously. "Wouldn't someone have come looking for them?" Daniel shook his head, trying to make sense of the extraordinary situation. The logbook mentions Chief Donovan as the only local official aware of the vault's existence. If he died before the bonds were transferred, then nobody would know they were here, Jason finished. The thought, but wouldn't the government have records? Maybe they do, somewhere in archives. Or maybe with post-war chaos and reorganization, these particular bonds fell through the cracks. Daniel carefully examined one of the wooden crates. The question is, are they still valid, and if so, what are they worth now? That question led father and son to carefully pry open one of the smaller crates. Inside, protected by waxed paper and remarkably well preserved, were stacks of official United States war bonds in various denominations, some for amounts as high as $10,000, an enormous sum in 1940s dollars. "Dad, if these are still valid after all this time, they could be worth a fortune," Daniel finished, the implications slowly dawning on him. War bonds continue to earn interest until they're redeemed. These high-value bonds from 1943 to 1945, compounding for nearly 80 years. "We need to talk to an expert," Jason suggested, carefully photographing the bonds without touching them. "Someone who can tell us if they're still valid and what they might be worth. And we need to secure this vault immediately," Daniel added. "Whatever these bonds are worth, they're government property. We need to handle this absolutely by the book. Their first call was to Professor James Harris at the State University, a renowned expert in American economic history. After seeing Jason's photographs, the professor agreed to visit the station the following day, bringing with him a colleague from the Treasury Department who specialized in historical government securities. "This is unprecedented, Professor," Harris declared when he examined the vault and its contents. "I've heard rumors of forgotten bond repositories from the war, but I've never actually seen one. The security measures here are remarkable for the time period. The combination lock, the watertight concrete chamber, the fire-resistant construction. This was designed to protect extremely valuable assets." His colleague from the Treasury Department, Dr. Eleanor Chun, was equally amazed but more focused on practical matters. "These bonds are still technically valid," she confirmed after careful examination. "While most war bonds were redeemed after maturity, these were never presented for payment. Under Treasury regulations, they've continued to accrue interest, though at varying rates over the decades. What might they be worth today?" Daniel asked, the question that had been keeping him awake since their discovery. Dr. Chun hesitated. "Without a complete inventory and detailed calculation of each bond's specific terms, I can't give you an exact figure. But based on the denominations I've seen and the quantity here, conservatively speaking, we're looking at a value in excess of $250 million. The number hit Daniel and Jason like a physical blow. $250 million? Jason repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "At minimum," Dr. Chun confirmed. "Some of these rare high-denomination corporate bonds have appreciation terms that would make them particularly valuable. But I need to be clear, these are government securities. While you discovered them, they remain the property of the United States Treasury." Daniel nodded immediately. "I understand completely. We never considered anything else. We just want to make sure they're properly handled." "That's commendable," Professor Harris said approvingly. "Many people might have had different thoughts when finding something of this value." "I served my country for 20 years, Daniel replied simply. "Stealing from the government wasn't exactly on my retirement plan." Dr. Chun smiled. "The Treasury Department will be extremely grateful for your integrity, Mr. Hayes. This discovery is historically significant and financially substantial. There will need to be a formal process for documenting and transferring these securities to appropriate authorities." "What happens to them after that?" Jason asked. "They'll be verified, valued, and ultimately redeemed, with the proceeds going to the federal government," Dr. Chun explained. "It's essentially recovered assets that the government never knew it was missing." As they continued discussing the process forward, Daniel had a sudden realization about the timing of their discovery. The storm. If the basement hadn't flooded, we might never have found this vault. It could have remained hidden for another 80 years. "Sometimes disasters reveal unexpected treasures," Professor Harris observed. "Throughout history, floods, fires, and earthquakes have uncovered archaeological and historical finds that might otherwise have remained hidden forever." Over the next week, a team from the Treasury Department arrived to document, secure, and eventually transfer the bond repository. The discovery created considerable excitement in financial history circles, with several news organizations requesting interviews about what was being called the Millfield War Bond Discovery. Daniel was careful to maintain a low profile during the process, concerned about drawing too much attention to the station while the valuable bonds were still on site. However, word inevitably spread through Millfield, transforming Station 42 from an interesting renovation project to the center of a national news story. "You certainly know how to make an entrance into a community," Walter commented when he visited during the documentation process. "Most newcomers join the Rotary Club. You uncover $250 million in government bonds." Daniel laughed despite the stress of the situation. Believe me, this wasn't in my business plan. So what happens next? Walter asked. Once the bonds are gone and the excitement dies down? It was a good question. Daniel had been so focused on properly handling the discovery that he'd given little thought to what it meant for their original community center plans. We get back to work, I guess. The basement flooding set us back considerably. We'll need to completely reconstruct that section of flooring and properly seal the foundation. Those aren't cheap fixes. Walter studied him thoughtfully. You know, most people who found something like this would be trying to figure out how to get a finder's fee or reward. Daniel shrugged. That thought never really crossed my mind. These bonds were purchased by Americans to support their country during its greatest crisis. The right thing to do is return them to their rightful owner, the U.S. government. What Daniel didn't know was that Dr. Chun had been having extensive conversations with Treasury officials about exactly that subject. The government rarely offered rewards for returned property, but the extraordinary circumstances of this case, the historical significance, the substantial value, and the impeccable handling by the Hayes family had prompted unusual considerations. Meanwhile, as the bond recovery process continued, Harbor Point Investments intensified their pressure on downtown business owners. 3 more shops had received offers significantly above market value, and rumors circulated about potential zoning changes that would favor large-scale development over small businesses and historical preservation. They approached me yesterday, Catherine informed Daniel during a tense community meeting at Callahan's Diner. Offered triple the assessed value for our office building and suggested that opposition to their development plans would be professionally unwise. They're using the same tactics across the district, Michael Fleming confirmed. First comes the generous offer, then the veiled threats, then the sudden building code violations and tax reassessments. How are they influencing the code enforcement office? Daniel asked, concerned about the apparent corruption. Their parent company made a substantial economic development contribution to the city last month, Walter explained grimly. Suddenly, inspectors are finding violations in businesses that have operated safely for decades. Daniel thought about Station 42, still vulnerable with its ongoing renovations and limited operating budget. If Harbor Point Investments turned their attention to finding code violations there, the community center might not survive. We need to stand together, he suggested. Present a unified front at the next zoning commission meeting. Easy for you to say, one shop owner replied. Your building isn't being threatened with costly violations that could shut you down. Actually, it's probably next on their list, Daniel countered. Despite their best intentions, the economic pressure from Harbor Point Investments was taking its toll on community solidarity. Several owners were quietly considering the developers' offers, seeing acceptance as inevitable. Daniel returned to Station 42, feeling the weight of challenges he hadn't anticipated when purchasing the old fire station. The bond discovery had brought temporary fame, but no financial relief for their struggling community center. Without substantial funding for completion, the project might still fail, allowing Harbor Point to eventually acquire the property and demolish another piece of Millfield's history. Dad, you need to see this, Jason called from the office when Daniel entered. His son was on a video call with Dr. Chun from the Treasury Department. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him. I was just explaining to Jason that the Secretary of the Treasury would like to speak with you tomorrow morning. Can you be available for a video conference at 10 a.m.? The Secretary of the Treasury? Daniel repeated, surprised. Yes, of course. May I ask what this is regarding? The Secretary would prefer to discuss it directly, Dr. Chun replied diplomatically. But I can tell you it relates to your bond discovery and how the government wishes to acknowledge your handling of the situation. After the call ended, Jason turned to his father with barely contained excitement. What do you think it means? Are they going to give us a reward after all? I wouldn't count on it, Daniel cautioned, not wanting to raise hopes that might be disappointed. Government appreciation usually comes in the form of a certificate and a handshake. What neither of them could have anticipated was how the Treasury Secretary's call the following morning would transform not just their lives but potentially the future of Millfield's historic district itself. The video call with Treasury Secretary Margaret Richardson began precisely at 10 a.m. Daniel sat at his desk in the former chief's office, dressed in his most professional attire, a concession to the extraordinary circumstances. Jason hovered nearby, technically out of camera range but unwilling to miss this historic conversation. "Mr. Hayes," the secretary began, her tone warm but businesslike, "I want to personally thank you for your integrity in handling the Millfield war bond discovery. The securities you found represent not just monetary value, but an important chapter in our nation's financial history." "Thank you, Madam Secretary," Daniel replied, maintaining the formal demeanor ingrained by his military career. "We're just glad they're being properly preserved and documented. The Treasury Department has completed preliminary authentication of the bonds," she continued. "The total face value, accounting for accumulated interest, exceeds $267 million. This represents one of the largest recoveries of forgotten government securities in American history." Daniel nodded, still processing the staggering figure. "We're grateful they remained intact all these years." "That brings me to the purpose of our conversation," Secretary Richardson said, her expression becoming more animated. "The standard protocol when citizens return government property is simple acknowledgement. However, this situation is unprecedented in several respects." She paused, consulting a document off-screen before continuing. "First, these bonds were apparently forgotten during post-war administrative transitions. They were never reported missing or searched for, meaning they've essentially been off the government's books for nearly 8 decades. Second, your discovery was entirely accidental during legitimate renovation of property you legally purchased, not the result of search in government archives or facilities. And third, your immediate notification of authorities and impeccable handling of high-value government securities demonstrates extraordinary citizenship that deserves recognition." Daniel felt Jason's excitement building beside him, but maintained his professional composure. "We simply did what any responsible citizen would do, Madam Secretary." A slight smile crossed Richardson's face. "Mr. Hayes, in my experience, what you consider obvious ethical behavior is unfortunately not universal. The Treasury Department and the President believe this situation warrants special consideration." She lifted a document into view. "I've been authorized to offer you a finder's reward of 15% of the bond's total value, which amounts to approximately $40 million. The number hit Daniel like a physical blow. $40 million, he repeated, certain he had misheard. "That's correct," Richardson confirmed. "This percentage is consistent with what private financial institutions might offer for recovery of valuable instruments, though government agencies rarely have precedent for such arrangements. We consider it appropriate given the extraordinary circumstances." Daniel sat in stunned silence, unable to formulate a response. Jason had no such difficulty. His suppressed whoop of excitement was audible even off camera. "I don't know what to say," Daniel finally managed. "This is completely unexpected." "There are, of course, some conditions," the secretary continued. "The reward would be classified as taxable income. Additionally, we would request your participation in educational initiatives about the war bond program and its historical significance. The Treasury Department believes this discovery presents a valuable opportunity to educate Americans about our financial history." "Of course," Daniel agreed, still processing the life-changing implications. "We'd be honored to assist with that." "Excellent. My office will coordinate the necessary paperwork. The formal announcement will be made next week, and funds should be transferred within 30 days following completion of documentation." After the call ended, Daniel sat motionless, staring at the blank screen while Jason practically vibrated with excitement beside him. "Dad, $40 million. Do you realize what this means?" Daniel nodded slowly, the implications gradually crystallizing in his mind. "It means we can finish the community center without financial constraints. We can create an endowment to ensure its operation for decades. We can save the historic district," Jason finished, his teenage enthusiasm suddenly focused on something larger than personal gain. "We can help all those businesses Harbor Point is threatening." Daniel looked at his son with pride. Jason's first thought hadn't been about what luxuries or advantages the money could bring them personally, but about how it could benefit their newly adopted community. In that moment, Daniel knew he'd succeeded in what mattered most: raising a son with proper values and perspective. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he cautioned, though his own mind was racing with possibilities. "This money comes with responsibilities. We need to be thoughtful about how we use it." "But we are going to help save the district, right?" Jason pressed. Daniel smiled, his decision already made. "Yes, but first, we need a plan." The news of the Treasury Department's reward broke nationally the following week, transforming Station 42 into the center of a media frenzy. Reporters descended on Millfield, eager to document the extraordinary story of a forgotten World War II bond repository and the military veteran who had found it. Daniel handled the attention with characteristic restraint, deflecting personal praise and emphasizing the historical significance of the bonds themselves. When asked about his plans for the reward money, he spoke only of completing the community center renovation and establishing programs to serve Millfield residents. What he didn't reveal publicly was the strategy he had been developing with a carefully selected team of advisors: Catherine Donovan for her real estate expertise, Walter Grayson for his deep community knowledge, and surprisingly, Michael Fleming, whose construction experience proved invaluable for what Daniel had in mind. Harbor Point's strategy depends on acquiring key properties and forcing zoning changes, Catherine explained during a private strategy session in Station 42's conference room. They've already secured options on 3 buildings at inflated prices. To create momentum, their parent company made campaign contributions to 2 planning commission members, Walter added. The rezoning vote next month could go either way. Michael spread architectural drawings across the table. If they get the zoning changed, they'll demolish most of these buildings and construct this a standardized luxury shopping complex with high-end condos above. It would completely transform the character of downtown. Not in a good way, Jason observed, studying the renderings with evident distaste. Daniel examined the map of downtown Millfield, noting the properties Harbor Point had already targeted. So their strategy depends on creating the perception of inevitable development, forcing holdouts to sell before property values potentially decline during construction. Exactly, Catherine confirmed. They're following a playbook they've used in other coastal communities. Create financial pressure, exploit divisions within the community, promise economic benefits that rarely materialize for local residents. So we counter with our own strategy, Daniel proposed. One that preserves the district's character while still enabling economic growth. The digital archive Jason had created with Rebecca Sanderson's help attracted researchers and history enthusiasts from throughout the region. Most importantly, it provided a gathering place where community members could connect across generations and backgrounds. One evening in early December, as Daniel locked up after a particularly successful holiday craft market, he found Walter Grayson waiting in the newly landscaped courtyard, admiring the restoration work. "Remember when I gave you 6 months tops?" Walter asked, his gruff voice carrying unmistakable warmth. "Seems I might have underestimated you a bit." Daniel smiled. "Just a bit. Though without that storm in the flooded basement, things might have turned out very differently." That's the thing about challenges, Walter observed. They either break you or reveal opportunities you never knew existed. The real test is being ready to recognize those opportunities when they appear. And having the courage to act on them, Daniel added, thinking about the risks they'd taken in establishing the Heritage Trust and confronting Harbor Point's development plans. Courage, yes, Walter agreed, but also community. What you and Jason accomplished wasn't just about money, though I won't pretend 40 million doesn't help. It was about bringing people together around a shared vision instead of surrendering to outside pressures. As they walked toward the parking lot, snow began falling gently, the flakes catching in the glow of the vintage streetlights the Heritage Trust had recently restored. By the way, Walter mentioned casually, Catherine told me 3 new businesses have applied for space in the historic district. Seems word is spreading about our community-centered development model. Some economic. JOURNAL is sending a reporter next week to do a feature. Daniel nodded, pleased but not surprised. The Heritage Trust's approach was already attracting attention from other communities, facing similar development pressures. Jason's thinking about studying urban planning and historic preservation in college, he shared. Says he wants to help. Other towns create their own versions of what we've done here. Smart kid, Walter acknowledged. Though I hope he'll consider bringing those skills back to Millfield eventually. We could use his generation's perspective. As Walter departed, Daniel took a moment to admire Station 42's illuminated facade. The restored brass fixtures gleaming against the red brick. What had begun as a risky investment in an abandoned building had evolved into something far more significant, not just a financial windfall, but a model for community-driven development that honored the past while creating sustainable opportunities for the future. The journey hadn't been without setbacks. The basement flooding had initially seemed like a disaster, threatening to derail their entire renovation timeline. Yet that very challenge had revealed an extraordinary opportunity, not just the war, bonds themselves, but the chance to demonstrate how individual actions could ripple outward to benefit an entire community. As he turned to walk home through the gently falling snow, Daniel reflected on the lesson that had defined his military career and now his civilian life. True strength wasn't about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with integrity, adaptability, and the courage to envision possibilities others couldn't yet see. In purchasing Station 42, he had sought only to create a meaningful new chapter for himself and Jason, after years of military relocations and the painful loss of his wife. What they had found instead was a community worth defending, a cause worthy of investment, and the opportunity to demonstrate that prosperity didn't have to come at the expense of heritage and human connection. The discovery beneath the flooded basement had certainly changed their financial circumstances dramatically. But the real transformation, the one that would endure long after the money was spent, was in showing what became possible when a community refused to surrender its identity to outside interests and instead invested in its own distinctive character and values. As Daniel reached their apartment above the community center, he found Jason waiting with architectural drawings spread across their dining table plans for expanding the center's programs into neighboring buildings recently protected by preservation easements. What do you think, Dad? He asked eagerly. The Heritage Trust Board approved the preliminary concept this afternoon. Daniel studied the thoughtful designs, which seamlessly integrated historical elements with contemporary functionality. I think Chief Donovan would approve of how we're honoring his station's legacy, he replied, remembering the man whose hidden vault had transformed their lives. And Mom? Jason asked quietly. What would she think of all this? Daniel placed his hand on his son's shoulder, touched by the question. She'd be incredibly proud of you, not because of what we found, but because of what you chose to do with it. Character isn't revealed by good fortune. It's revealed by how you handle both challenges and opportunities. As they reviewed their plans together, snow continuing to fall outside their windows. Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the financial security they'd found, but for the community they'd helped strengthen and the legacy they were building together. Sometimes life's greatest floods revealed foundations strong enough to build upon for generations to come. 5 years after the discovery that transformed Millfield's future, Daniel stood on the newly constructed observation deck overlooking the harbor. The spring morning was crisp and clear, with sunlight dancing across the water and illuminating the revitalized waterfront district. What had once been a collection of struggling businesses and deteriorating buildings had become a vibrant community hub that maintained its historical character while embracing thoughtful modernization. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, nor had it been without challenges. The initial excitement of the war bond discovery and the Heritage Trust's formation had eventually given way to the complex realities of community revitalization. Not every business had survived the transition, and there had been heated debates about preservation priorities versus practical needs. Some residents still questioned whether refusing Harbor Point's development offer had been the right choice for Millfield's long-term economic health. Yet standing here now, watching tourists and locals alike strolling along the historically preserved waterfront with its carefully restored facades and thriving local businesses, Daniel felt confident in the path they had chosen. The authentic character that made Millfield unique had been preserved, while new opportunities had emerged that no one could have anticipated 5 years earlier. "Penny for your thoughts," came a familiar voice as Catherine Donovan joined him at the railing. At 68, she remained a formidable presence in the community, having transitioned from running her family's real estate business to serving as chairperson of the Heritage Trust. "Just appreciating how far we've come," Daniel replied, gesturing toward the bustling waterfront. "Remember what this looked like when I first arrived?" Catherine smiled. Empty storefronts, peeling paint, and a general sense of resignation. "The contrast is remarkable." "Not just physically," Daniel noted. "There's an energy now, a sense of possibility that wasn't here before." They stood in companionable silence, observing the community they had helped transform. Below them, a group of architecture students sketched the historic buildings while a tour guide explained Millfield's unique approach to preservation-based development. "The Coastal Preservation Conference starts tomorrow," Catherine reminded him. "Representatives from 17 communities arriving this afternoon. The governor is attending the opening reception." Daniel nodded. "Jason's flying in tonight. He's excited to present his research on economic impact metrics for preservation-based revitalization. Harvard's urban planning program suits him," Catherine observed, "though I suspect he'll end up back here eventually. Some people just belong in certain places." The observation resonated with Daniel. After 2 decades of military relocations, finding a place that truly felt like home had been an unexpected gift, one even more valuable than the financial windfall they'd received. "The Journal of Sustainable Development is sending a reporter to cover the conference," Catherine continued. "They're particularly interested in how the Community Investment Fund has performed." The investment fund had been one of the Heritage Trust's most innovative initiatives. Using a portion of the war bond reward, they had established a fund that invested in local business expansion while generating returns that supported ongoing preservation efforts. The model had proven remarkably effective, creating a self-sustaining engine for community development that didn't depend solely on Daniel's initial contribution. "3 more towns have adopted variations of our approach," Daniel noted. "The one in Maine is particularly promising. They've already secured protection for their entire harbor district. All because you bought an abandoned fire station for $2,500, Catherine mused. "And then had the good fortune to experience catastrophic basement flooding." Daniel laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous." "The best stories often do," she replied. "Speaking of which, have you decided whether to accept the State Preservation Board appointment? Walter says you're being stubborn about it." The governor had recently nominated Daniel to serve on the PUMB, State's Historic Preservation Board, citing Millfield's success as a model for other communities. He had been hesitant to accept, concerned about having sufficient expertise for such a responsibility. "I'm still considering it," he admitted. "There are people with far more experience and knowledge about historic preservation." "Perhaps," Catherine acknowledged, "but there aren't many with your particular combination of leadership experience, practical problem-solving ability, and demonstrated success. Sometimes perspective matters more than technical expertise." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from Jason, confirming his arrival time that evening. Attached was a photo of the presentation materials he had prepared for the conference, showcasing Millfield's transformation through compelling before and after images and economic impact data. "I should get back to Station 42, Daniel said, tucking his phone away. "The final conference preparations need attention." As they walked along the harbor promenade, they passed several businesses that had been among the first to receive preservation easements from the Heritage Trust. The historic facades remained intact, but behind those preserved exteriors, the businesses had evolved and modernized, a bakery now offering artisanal goods that attracted visitors from throughout the region, a bookstore that had expanded to include a popular cafe, a marine supply store that had developed a thriving online presence while maintaining its brick-and-mortar heritage. "Martha's grandson is taking over the pharmacy next month," Catherine mentioned as they passed the century-old business. "He's keeping the historic soda fountain, but adding a wellness center in the renovated back section. Perfect example of honoring heritage while embracing change." Station 42 Community Center had undergone its own evolution over the years. What had begun as a simple renovation project had expanded into a multi-purpose facility that served as both community hub and visitor center. The War Bond Vault had become a popular museum exhibit, drawing history enthusiasts and school groups year-round. The preservation workshop Daniel had established provided training for contractors specializing in historic restoration, addressing a skills gap that had previously made such projects prohibitively expensive for many property owners. As they approached the station, Daniel noticed a tour bus disembarking visitors, another organized group exploring what travel magazines had begun calling the Millfield model of community-centered historic preservation. Still not entirely comfortable with being a tourist attraction, he admitted as they watched the visitors taking photographs of Station 42's restored facade. "Success attracts attention," Catherine replied pragmatically. "And every visitor who comes to learn about what we've accomplished here represents potential change in their own community. Your story has become something of an inspiration." Inside the community center, preparations for the preservation conference were in full swing. The main event space, formerly the fire station's equipment bay, had been transformed with exhibition panels highlighting successful preservation projects from throughout the region. A special display featured photographs of Millfield's downtown district before and after the Heritage Trust's intervention, accompanied by economic data demonstrating the tangible benefits of their approach. Walter Grayson was directing volunteers in arranging seating for tomorrow's opening session, his characteristic gruff manner softened by evident pride in what the community had accomplished. "About time you showed up," he called when he spotted Daniel. "We've got 17 community delegations arriving in less than 4 hours, and the governor's staff just called with security protocol changes for the 3rd time today." "Everything under control, then?" Daniel asked with a smile, familiar with Walter's tendency to mask enthusiasm with complaints. "As it'll ever be," Walter grumbled, though his eyes betrayed his satisfaction. At 67, he remained deeply involved in community affairs, having transitioned from running his marine supply store to serving as the Heritage Trust's Director of Special Projects. Daniel made his way to the office, the same former chief's office, where he had received the life-changing video call from the Treasury Secretary 5 years earlier. The space had been preserved in its historical configuration, though now it served as the administrative headquarters for both the Community Center and the Heritage Trust. On his desk sat a framed photograph taken the day they had discovered the war bond vault. Jason stood beside him, both of them covered in mud from the flooding but grinning with the excitement of their unexpected find. Beside it was a more recent image, Jason in his Harvard sweatshirt, presenting his research on Millfield's revitalization at an urban planning conference in Boston. The contrast between the two photographs represented so much of what had transpired. In the intervening years, what had begun as a personal setback, a flooded basement threatening their renovation project, had ultimately created opportunities that transformed not just their lives, but an entire community's trajectory. Daniel was reviewing the conference schedule when Michael Fleming arrived, carrying architectural renderings for the newest Heritage Trust project, the restoration of Millfield's historic train station, which would become a transportation museum and community art space. "Final designs for your approval," Michael announced, spreading the drawings across Daniel's desk. "Structural assessment confirms we can preserve 90% of the original elements, while bringing everything up to current code." Michael's construction company had evolved dramatically over the past 5 years, transitioning from general contracting to specializing in historic preservation. The expertise they had developed through Millfield's revitalization had created unexpected business opportunities throughout the region as other communities sought to replicate similar results. "The apprenticeship program is paying dividends," Michael noted, pointing out details in the restoration plans. "These specialized woodworking elements would have been impossibly expensive to reproduce 5 years ago. Now we have 6 trained craftspeople who can handle them at reasonable cost." The apprenticeship initiative had been another unforeseen benefit of Millfield's transformation. Recognizing that historic preservation required specialized skills no longer commonly taught, the Heritage Trust had established a training program that connected experienced craftspeople with young workers seeking sustainable career paths. The program had created dozens of well-paying jobs while addressing a critical skill shortage in the preservation field. As the day progressed, conference attendees began arriving delegates from coastal communities throughout New England. State preservation officials, economic development specialists, and even representatives from several national foundations interested in the Millfield approach. Each group was welcomed and guided through tours of the downtown district, where they could see firsthand how preservation-based development had revitalized the community. By evening, Station 42 had transformed into a reception venue with local restaurants showcasing regional specialties and information, stations highlighting various aspects of Millfield's revitalization journey. Daniel moved through the gathering, answering questions and connecting visitors with local business owners who could speak directly to their experiences. Jason arrived midway through the reception, dropping his travel bag just inside the entrance. Before enthusiastically greeting the community members who had become extended family over the past 5 years. At 21, he had matured into a thoughtful young man whose passion for community development was informed by both academic training and practical experience. "The governor's asking about you," Jason informed his father after they had caught up briefly. "She's particularly interested in the community investment fund structure." "Political interest usually means either regulation or replication," Daniel observed wryly. "In this case, I think it's the latter," Jason replied. "Her office has been developing a statewide initiative based partly on the Millfield model. They're calling it Heritage Economics or something similarly catchy." The reception continued until nearly midnight, with impromptu discussion groups forming around specific aspects of historic preservation and community revitalization. Daniel observed with satisfaction how Millfield's business owners had become passionate advocates for their approach, sharing concrete examples of how preservation had benefited their operations, rather than restricting them. After the last guest departed, Daniel and Jason walked through the quiet streets of downtown Millfield, appreciating the historic buildings now gently illuminated by period-appropriate lighting installed by the Heritage Trust. The peaceful scene offered little evidence of the contentious battles that had been fought to preserve these structures and the community they represented. Remember when we first looked at Station 42? The metaphor wasn't lost on Daniel. Their discovery of the war bond vault had certainly been unexpected, but equally surprising had been the revelation of Millfield's potential for renewal when its heritage was properly valued and protected. "Your presentation tomorrow is going to make quite an impact," Daniel noted, referencing the research Jason would be sharing at the conference. "The economic data is particularly compelling," Jason nodded. "The numbers matter, especially to policymakers. But what doesn't show up in the statistics is just as important: the sense of community identity, the connection to place, the pride people feel in being part of something authentic and enduring." They stood in comfortable silence, watching moonlight reflect off the harbor waters. Despite the late hour, several establishments remained open. A jazz trio played in the restored boathouse that had become a popular music venue, while the historic ice cream parlor served late-night customers enjoying the mild spring evening. "Professor Harrington thinks I should expand my research into a book," Jason mentioned casually. "Says the Millfield case study could provide a framework for other communities facing similar development pressures." "You should do it," Daniel encouraged. "Your perspective bridges academic theory and practical implementation in a way that could be genuinely useful." "I'd want to incorporate other voices," Jason mused. "Catherine's real estate expertise, Walter's business perspective, Michael's insights on preservation craftsmanship. Maybe personal stories from business owners who initially opposed the Heritage Trust approach but later became advocates." He gestured toward the exhibition panels showing Millfield's transformation. "What you'll see and hear about during this conference isn't just a story about historic preservation or economic development. It's about recognizing that our communities' greatest strengths often lie in the very features others might consider outdated or inefficient. It's about understanding that authentic character and distinctive heritage aren't obstacles to progress, but foundations for sustainable prosperity." Throughout the day, presentations highlighted various aspects of Millfield's approach: the preservation easement program that protected historic structures while providing capital for business improvements, the community investment fund that generated sustainable support for ongoing preservation, the craftsmanship apprenticeship initiative that created skilled jobs while addressing preservation challenges, the tourism strategy that leveraged authentic historical character rather than manufactured attractions. Jason's presentation on economic impact metrics drew particular interest, as it provided concrete evidence that preservation-based development could generate stronger long-term economic benefits than conventional redevelopment approaches. His research showed how Millfield's property values, business revenues, and employment opportunities had all increased more substantially than comparable communities that had embraced standard development models. As the conference continued into its second day, discussion shifted from Millfield's specific experience to how its approaches might be adapted for other communities. Representatives from fishing villages, manufacturing towns, and agricultural communities all identified elements of the Millfield model that could address their specific preservation challenges. During the closing session, the governor announced a new state initiative that would provide matching funds for communities establishing their own heritage trusts, along with technical assistance adapting Millfield's preservation easement approach to different contexts. What began with one man's purchase of an abandoned fire station has evolved into a movement that could transform how we approach development throughout our state, she declared. By honoring our heritage while embracing thoughtful change, we create communities where both history and opportunity can flourish side by side. As the conference concluded and delegates departed, Daniel found himself back at the harbor overlook, joined by the core team that had made Millfield's transformation possible: Catherine Donovan, Walter Grayson, Michael Fleming, and of course, Jason. Together they watched the sunset paint the historic waterfront in warm golden light. "So what's next?" Walter asked, voicing the question they had all been considering. "We've protected the historic district, established sustainable funding mechanisms, created replicable models for other communities. Where do we go from here?" "There's the train station restoration," Michael suggested. "And 3 more buildings still needing preservation easements. Plus the regional expansion opportunities," Catherine added. "Several neighboring communities have expressed interest in establishing their own heritage trusts with our guidance." Jason offered a different perspective. "Maybe the question isn't what specific project comes next, but how we continue evolving our approach to meet changing needs. Preservation isn't about freezing a community in time. It's about thoughtfully connecting past, present, and future." Daniel nodded, appreciating his son's insight. 5 years ago, we were focused on saving buildings. Now we understand we're really preserving possibilities, creating spaces where community connections can flourish and new opportunities can emerge organically. As twilight deepened over the harbor, the historic district's lights came on one by one, illuminating architecture that spanned centuries but remained vibrantly alive in the present. In the distance, Station 42's renovated facade glowed warmly, its transformation from abandoned building to community cornerstone, symbolizing Millfield's broader renewal. Daniel thought about the journey that had brought them here, from the uncertainty of purchasing a deteriorating fire station, through the shock of discovering the war bond vault during a devastating flood, to the complex process of leveraging that unexpected fortune for community benefit rather than personal gain. Each challenge had revealed opportunities that wouldn't have been visible without the courage to face setbacks directly and imagine possibilities others couldn't yet see. "You know what I've realized?" he said to the group gathered around him. "The real treasure wasn't the war bonds themselves. It was discovering what becomes possible when a community unites around preserving what makes it special while still embracing thoughtful change." Walter grunted his agreement, though $40 million certainly didn't hurt. Their laughter echoed across the harbor as lights from fishing boats returning home for the evening dotted the horizon. The Millfield they had helped create resilient, authentic, forward-looking, while honoring its past, would continue evolving long after they were gone. The foundations they had strengthened would support generations not yet born, just as Chief Donovan's hidden vault had ultimately served a purpose he could never have anticipated. As Daniel looked at the community they had transformed together, he felt profound gratitude for the flood that had once seemed a devastating setback, but had ultimately revealed foundations strong enough to build upon for decades to come. Sometimes, life's greatest treasures remained hidden until challenges forced us to look beneath the surface, revealing not just forgotten bonds, but the enduring connections that truly sustained communities through changing times. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.